Hello, I'm Emma Webb. We're here at the ARC conference and I'm joined now by Jimmy Smith from The Big Show on the Dad Talk Today social media platform.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming over and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me, I appreciate it.
So I'd like to start by just getting your thoughts on the conference so far, because I know that you do a lot of work in masculinity and things to do with family breakdown, the social fabric. That's been a big topic of this conference over the last couple of days. What's been your main takeaway so far?
You know what, I really love the fact that some of the greatest minds on the planet, both men and women, have come together here in London to really make sure that the nuclear family is getting back together, because I think over the last couple of decades, we've seen that kind of get torn apart lately, and that's my biggest take, is that they're really advocating for men to be better, women to be better, and overall families getting back together.
Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of talk as well about issues relating to family breakdown. There was a discussion yesterday with Louise Perry and Mary Harrington. They were talking about things to do with the sexual revolution sort of from a women's perspective. But how do you see these issues from a men's perspective? Because we know that there's a male mental health crisis.
There is.
But there's also, I think, a kind of cultural issue around masculinity. Masculinity has almost been pathologized.
Really has.
So what's your take on those sorts of conversations that have been happening in the conference hall, but also outside here in between talks?
So I have the unique opportunity to talk to many, many men. And as you grow up as a young boy, you're kind of taught to suppress your feelings. And men have done that, in some places they're looked at as weak or feminine if men were to express their feelings. And I think that when we don't have a sounding board, when we don't have other like-minded men to share, then what happens is men grow up and the only feelings they express are anger. And we don't want that to be the case. I love the fact that, we're seeing a different turn in the tide where men can now express how they're feeling. Men are now heard more than they ever have been over the last 30 years. And conferences like this really support those kinds of things.
And stoicism is something that here in the UK has been very demonized. Obviously, Jordan Peterson, who's one of the key organizers behind this conference, has been very outspoken about how important it is to have strong men in a society.
Yeah.
And you give masculinity training, don't you?
I do,
so
yes.
What message would you send to those young men who might be watching this, who agree with that message that society does need strong men, and that there's nothing to be ashamed of about being male, but also about being masculine? Exactly.
And I think where the rubber meets the road, what we really need for young boys is we need fathers back in the home. One of the speakers, I believe it was Warren Farrell, said that men, kids need their father's time, not their dime. And I thought that was pretty powerful, because kids are very, very perceptive. They're always watching, even when we don't think that they are. So really working on making sure that men and women are getting along and they're giving each other what it is that the other person needs, and we can keep those nuclear families together. That's the best thing we can do for young boys.
How important are fathers in the broad sort of cultural context? Not just within the family, and obviously that is the first building block of a strong society, but what is the impact of having a society where men are increasingly demonized, and where the social fabric is so torn that you have lots of young men who are growing up without a father figure in their lives?
Yeah, and I think you're seeing a lot of it today, right? I mean, young boys are failing in just about everything academically. And outside of sports, there's not really a good male role model, because the elementary schools and the middle schools and even the high schools are dominated by females, and for good reason. But a lot of young boys see their first bit of masculinity when they get out of high school into college, or if they're playing sports, or even in the workplace. So really working on making sure that men are being around their kids is a really important role. When you look at everything from suicide rates to imprisonment, without the father in the household, because men, generally speaking, they are the ones to instill discipline and structure, generally speaking. And when boys go without that discipline and structure, they run roughshod out there in the world, and we're seeing the repercussions of that.
What do you think the solution is to this? Because of course you can't reintroduce father figures into the lives of those young men or boys who currently don't have a father figure in their lives. I know a lot of young people look to figures like Jordan Peterson, but they also sometimes look to people who might be a more negative influence as a role model. So what is the solution? I know this conference is very much focused on how people can go away from this conference. It's called the Alliance of Responsible Citizenship. So as responsible citizens, what can we all be doing to try and fix that social fabric, to do something for those young boys who currently don't have a good solid role model in their lives?
I think the first thing we've got to do to really make sure that fathers and mothers are staying together for their children, because this is not a suppressed women or suppressed men issue. When something affects the women and the men, it also affects our children. So I think what we got to do is we got to get back to making sure that we have successful marriages. And one of the things that I believe we've kind of gone away from that our grandparents and our great-grandparents had was duty. A lot of times we focus a lot on the happiness of the marriage, and when one person's not happy, they're out the door. And today's laws kind of support, favor women to be leaving marriages. And I'm not saying anything bad about women, of course, but what I'm saying is that marriage in today's life and the way that the court systems are, how they handle divorces, it almost incentivizes one of the two parties to break the contract. And we need to get back to the duty. Our grandparents weren't always happy. They weren't always jumping off of the couch and having a great time, but what they did do is they stuck through the thick and the thin, till death do you part. And so if we really start kind of pushing duty back into the marriages, we'll see long-term marriages that last 50 and 60 years the way that our grandparents' marriages did.
Yesterday there was a speech from Bishop Barron, and he spoke about this two different understandings of freedom. Understanding freedom in terms of license to be able to do whatever you want, and understanding freedom as something that comes with certain responsibilities and duties. Yeah. What do you think of the sort of discussion on how you move from this understanding of freedom as license culturally to an more old-fashioned understanding of freedom as something that you need to be responsible with?
I think that what we got to do is we got to make sure that we are the best version of ourselves as we can be. The best the best woman and to be a best wife, and a best man to be the best husband. And we have to be independent, but being independent is not where we stop. We have to learn how to become interdependent. Independent is a very inward look. I can support myself, I can take care of myself. But the highest hierarchy, which is what Stephen Covey says in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is when you move into the third and the highest hierarchy, you become interdependent, and that's a we mentality. Together we can make this work together. Together we can be a team. Together we can accomplish things that we could never do on our own. And I believe that's a very key element that's been missing, and if we put that back into marriages, we'll see success.
Just finally, what would you say to those people who pathologize masculinity and say that masculinity is inherently toxic?
I don't believe there is any toxic masculinity, and every time that chaos manifests itself, no one talks about toxic masculinity then. When a house is on fire, or kids need to be saved, or there's wars to be fought, the first person you're going to be looking to are those toxic masculine men to go out there and save the day. So masculinity should not be seen as toxic. Men help build the world that we live in right now, and is a good. And so we should all be blessing those men who are deemed toxic.
And I think we're definitely entering into a period of our history where we do need men like that. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.